noble Baroness Grey was perhaps still running propriety and ethics, something like this would not have happened.
Sir John Whittingham.
I completely share the view of my right friend. Like her, I too went through a process in which I was required to get rid of rather smaller shareholding interests than the one held by Lord Mandelson. But this is just one of a huge range of questions to which we need to know the answer. The second stage of the process.
Before my friend moves on from that stage, may I? Thank you.
Alicia Kearns.
One other appointment we've had, and some might argue he is the de facto Foreign Secretary, is the National Security Advisor, Jonathan Powell. How can we have confidence that he went through the appropriate vetting, not least when he's running around having secret meetings with Wang Yi and other Chinese senior officials, when we cannot have confidence that it was done in the American ambassador, our ambassador to America?
John Whittingham.
Well, I mean, I think once we get the revelations of the documents as to precisely what occurred in the case of Lord Mandelson, that is bound to raise questions about what procedures were followed in the case of other appointees, and particularly the one that she raises, Jonathan Powell, who in many ways is the Foreign Secretary of this country. The second stage of the process, we were told, was the due diligence carried out by the Cabinet Office. The due diligence consisted of identification of information and a second part of it, which was judgment about it. However, all of the information that was obtained in the due diligence was actually in the public domain already. There was no additional investigation take place. It was simply, essentially, an internet trawl. That report, the due diligence report, was presented to the Cabinet Secretary for onward transmission to the Prime Minister. However, even at that time, actually, due diligence through an internet trawl would have already shown up the fact that Peter Mandelson had been to stay in the townhouse belonging to Jeffrey Epstein after his conviction. So the continuing association after his conviction had already been reported in the press and therefore was bound to form a part of the due diligence process. And the question which has been raised several times in this debate already, which is when the appointment was made, did the Prime Minister know? And we understand that potentially he did, which I assume was contained in the due diligence report. That was put directly to the Cabinet Secretary. Did you tell the Prime Minister about Mandelson staying in the Manhattan townhouse when Epstein was in jail? And all that the Cabinet Secretary said to us was, I will consider whether there is further information that can be shared and write to the committee. We have never had a full answer to that question. And then the third part of the process was the developed vetting, which we are told is a usual process for very senior appointments. It consists of a wide range of different investigations. We're told it's staff files, company records checks, check of spent and unspent criminal records, credit history, a check of security service records, and an interview not just of the candidate but also of the referees would have been supplied by a trained investigating officer. I think we will need to see the outcome of that report, even if it can only be provided, as the government has now conceded, to the Intelligence and Security Committee. But taken together with those three processes, the Prime Minister still decided there was no obstacle to the appointment of Peter Mandelson as ambassador to the United States. We then come to the question put to him, a Prime Minister's questions, following the Bloomberg report of the large number of emails. The Foreign Office learnt of those emails the night before Prime Minister's questions, and I pressed the Permanent Under-Secretary as to whether or not Number 10 had been told that these emails contained material evidence which could potentially change the whole perception of Lord Mandelson's relationship. He said that he had a duty of care to Lord Mandelson and therefore he needed to make checks. He essentially told us that Number 10 had not been informed. I find that very hard to believe. As somebody who used to prepare the Prime Minister for answering questions, the idea that something was not told to the Prime Minister of that order seems absolutely extraordinary. But there is another question which I think needs to be asked. The British government say that they discovered of all these emails which proved that the relationship was very long-standing and much closer than had ever been admitted by Lord Mandelson. They discovered them because Bloomberg obtained copies in a leak. They were held by the US government in the Department of Justice for months. The US government knew all about them, but it was only when we're told Bloomberg obtained them that the British government found out.
Will you give way on that point?
Of course I can.
Do you believe it's conceivable then that the government did not ask, is there any compromat on the US ambassador, the British ambassador, to become the US ambassador on that basis? Because it seems incredulous that this has been known about, as he rightly pointed out in his speech, for years.
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and I think there are two possible questions. The first is, why didn't the British government ever ask the US government, who they knew had all this material from Jeffrey Epstein, whether it contained any additional information that might be relevant to the appointment of Peter Mandelson? Or equally, our relationship, we are told, with the United States is so close. We share intelligence. Is it really the case that they didn't feel it necessary to tell us? Either way, it is an appalling breakdown of communication, and I have to say I find it very difficult to believe. These are all questions which we pressed the Permanent Under-Secretary on, that we pressed the Cabinet Secretary on, and we failed to obtain any answers. And I have to say that my confidence in a further investigation by the Cabinet Secretary is actually influenced by his failure, really, to answer any of these questions when he came before the Select Committee the first time.
Would my right honourable friend give way?
Of course I can.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. Once the Bloomberg leak had been done, I'm sure my right honourable friend remembers that many of us asked the government, surely now that these things have turned out to be true, surely we should now turn Lord Mandelson, Peter Mandelson, inside out, as if he had become outed as a spy. And surely the things which have now been released over the weekend would have come out. Is he surprised, like I am, that the government did not seem to do the investigation into Peter Mandelson subsequent to him being fired?
I completely share the astonishment expressed by my honourable friend. And as further revelations come out about the behaviour of Jeffrey Epstein, particularly in relation to his links with Russia and other hostile powers, you'd have thought then again the government would say, please, if there is anything involving Peter Mandelson, we wish to know about this. The potential damage to our national interests that may have occurred as a result of Lord Mandelson's continuing to feed information to Jeffrey Epstein is huge, and that is something which has not yet even begun to be properly exposed.
With my honourable friend, I'm grateful to my honourable friend. In his interrogation of the Permanent Under-Secretary of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and the Cabinet Secretary, was he able to shed any light on another part of our motion about whether there was any severance payments made to Lord Mandelson, how much they were? Because if there were payments made, we should be seeking to get them back for the taxpayer.
My honourable friend is absolutely right and actually anticipates my exact next point, in that I asked the question.
Well said.
I asked the question to the Permanent Under-Secretary whether or not he was still on the civil service payroll. I was told he was not. I was asked whether or not a settlement payment had been made, and I was told that he had resigned, but that his contract would be honoured. And when I asked whether or not that included a payment, I was told it was a confidential matter between him and the civil service, but that I will see if I can actually find it, because the exact wording is worth my just quoting again. So I said, so the Foreign Office is not going to give any information as to whether the payment was made to him, to which the Permanent Under-Secretary said, Any implications of his termination will be reported in our annual report and accounts, but termination payments below a particular threshold, which I think is £300,000, do not get itemised. So I think the quick answer is no. However, I hope that, again, that is something which the government has now indicated will be made public.
Yeah.
I want to conclude my remarks by saying, of course, I recognise that...
Could he give way just before he concludes?
Yeah.
Just before I do, yeah.
I'm really grateful for the right honourable gentleman for giving way. And I'm just thinking about the response that he got from the Permanent Under-Secretary. Do you think that was a Permanent Under-Secretary trying to be helpful to his committee? Or do you think that was obfuscation and telling elected members of Parliament to get their nose out of his business?
I say to my old friend, I regarded the whole session as a sort of masterpiece in Sir Humphrey's speak. It was an awful lot of words conveying very little substance. But I just want to come back to this point. I absolutely understand the necessity of not revealing information that may be damaging to national security. But I think, as one or two members have already said, actually transparency is really important here. And therefore, I hope that the government will make public as much as is possible. And certainly as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, I will be pressing that the committee look at this, all the information that is published, and follow up on the rather unsatisfactory session that we already had. Madam Deputy Speaker, I just want to conclude with my overall impression, having looked at this process in some depth. It was clear that the Prime Minister wanted Peter Mandelson to be our ambassador in the United States. The Foreign Office had to conduct the usual procedures, and we heard about the three parts of the process. But I believe that the message was very clearly sent to the Foreign Office: go through your motions, but make sure that it ends up with his approval being granted. And that has been the overriding impression, that to some extent boxes were ticked, but the Foreign Office were told very clearly he is to be the next ambassador. And that was a direct instruction of the Prime Minister.
Andrew Lewin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I must start by putting on record my horror at the crimes of Jeffrey Epstein, as so many honourable members have done today. This man is a paedophile and a perpetrator of evil acts. The pain of the victims and their families must be unimaginable. And I want to pay tribute to the speech made by my honourable friend, the member for Bolsover, earlier today, which was incredibly brave and powerful, and my words cannot match hers, but if you were not in the chamber, I urge all colleagues to watch that speech. I think it's clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the House is united in disdain at the actions of Lord Mandelson. And it was always my intention to speak briefly this afternoon, and it was always my intention to talk about this being an opportunity for the House to come together. Because I think it's unmistakably the case that when we talk to our constituents, so often people will say, why don't you talk to each other like human beings? Why don't you respect to each other? Why don't you respect each other? Why is this place a pantomime so often? But it isn't always the case, and today it absolutely has not been the case. We do respect each other. I've been here for 18 months. I have the humility to say I have much to learn about this place, but there are many people on all sides of this chamber who I admire greatly. And this afternoon, just to call out a few of them, the member for North Dorset's speech, the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, the very important intervention of the former Deputy Prime Minister, which we'll come to a little bit later, the interventions from the member for Rutland and Stamford. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is not just today that we listen to each other and should listen to each other. One example, members who know me will know I'm a passionate pro-European. I define as a social democrat and internationalist. Some will cheer that, others will not. One who probably would not, and is not in this place today, is the member for Chingford and Woodford Green. There isn't a huge amount that we would agree on, but whenever he speaks on international affairs, I do my utmost to come and listen to him because of the experience that he has in this House. And I'm very surprised to see he's not in his place today, but the member for Strangford, the only thing that matches his number of interventions, in Westminster Hall, is his decency as a man and as a parliamentarian. So I wanted to put all of that on the record. The focus today, of course, though, rightly has been on Mandelson. There is unity in contempt for his actions, the scandalous and the brazen way in which government information was leaked, how we undermined the government and his colleagues seemingly at every turn. His actions will offend every British citizen, every public servant and every member of this House. It's why decisive action was needed, and it's why this debate this afternoon was so important. I do wholeheartedly welcome the decision that has been made and proposed by the government that the Intelligence and Security Committee will determine which documents are released. And I want to commend the courage of those who made that argument earlier today, not knowing if they would be successful in making their case, but also the courage of the government to accept those recommendations.
I will.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way on that point, and he has articulated very eloquently how we have come together in this House, both to roundly condemn the role that Mandelson has played in the corrupt web around Jeffrey Epstein, but also that we have come out to say together we must have all the full facts laid bare, and I hope that he will join me in congratulating the government on conceding and putting forward the amendment for independent scrutiny by the ISC so that they will oversee the disclosure of the appropriate documents.
Thank you. I wholeheartedly agree with my honourable friend, and that's why I began my remarks by saying this has been an important day for this House, because I sincerely believe that we are collectively in a much better place now than we were when we started the debate. I will.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way and for the tone of the speech that he is giving. He talks about us having moderate language and being representatives of our constituents, and I agree with him. But in addition to that, we are elected to this place, hopefully because of our judgment and the trust of our electorate. Now, whatever the outcome of this debate and whatever the outcome of those documents, we already know that the public knew, the media knew, our constituents knew, we all knew, and we discovered at about 12 o'clock today, the Prime Minister knew that Lord Mandelson had a close personal relationship with a convicted paedophile. Yeah. Does he think the Prime Minister can still command the trust of this House and the public?
Yeah, very well. I think there are unquestionably things that we did not know. And I listened incredibly carefully to the Prime Minister in PMQs today, and he was clear, and it was a personal statement for him, that he has felt lied to at every single stage of the process. And the precise reason why I think everybody in this House wants to see every single document published that we possibly can is to get to the bottom of that. But I believe the Prime Minister. I'll make some progress. All of us in this House deserve the truth. Everyone in the country deserves the truth. And most importantly of all, so does every victim. Mandelson's time in public life was a very dark chapter. It is the duty of this House to shine a light on it and give the public the answers that they absolutely deserve.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This situation stinks. Peter Mandelson maintained a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein after he had been convicted. This wasn't before anyone knew about his grotesque crimes, not when it was being whispered about, but after his conviction, when the world knew exactly who and what Jeffrey Epstein was. Yet before his appointment as ambassador to the United States, senior Labour MPs went on television and social media to praise him, members sitting opposite today. They knew the facts, because by that point, it was already public knowledge that Mandelson had stayed in Epstein's New York home while Epstein was serving time as a convicted paedophile. When asked about this last September, the Prime Minister told this House he had full confidence in Peter Mandelson despite knowing about his close relationship with Epstein. That's right, the leader of the Labour Party and the Prime Minister had full confidence in a man that was besties with a convicted nonce. What a disgrace. And what we are witnessing is not accountability, it is the Westminster Club protecting its own. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is not just about this Labour government. Large sections of the media also play their part. Mandelson didn't simply drift back into public life, he was rehabilitated, rebranded, presented as respectable. He was welcomed on the BBC's flagship programme as a wiser elder statesman, given differential treatment by The Spectator, The Guardian and The Sunday Times. These are the same outlets that lecture relentlessly about standards and morality when it is a trade unionist, a protester, a working class person who puts a foot wrong. But when it's one of their own, the tone changes. Suddenly it's about experience, pragmatism, it's about getting things done. This is how power protects itself. And what about the victims, the girls and the young women abused by Epstein? They received an apology by Mandelson only after sustained pressure. It was not freely given, not offered because it was the right thing to do. And until recently, he still enjoyed the Zone 2 dinner party treatment, with magazine-style PR photos of Mandelson being published only this week. Then, Madam Deputy Speaker, there is the money. At least $75,000 was transferred from Epstein to Mandelson. He says he can't remember the transactions. If £75,000 landed in the bank account of almost anyone else in the country, they definitely would remember. To claim otherwise is contemptuous and goes to the heart of why trust in politics is collapsing. If those in power can't remember vast sums of money flowing into their accounts, then why should the public believe that they are acting in their public interest? Madam Deputy Speaker, this has only come to light because American authorities released the Epstein files. We are told that the UK has no record of Mandelson's emails. If those files hadn't been released, he would have sailed back into public life, shielded by friendly journalists and wealthy backers. That's how broken our political culture has become. And now further emails have emerged, raising serious questions about whether market-sensitive information was leaked while he was at the heart of government. When ordinary people make mistakes, they pay the price. Nurses are disciplined, teachers are suspended, care workers lose their jobs. But if you belong to the Westminster Club, you can be linked to one of the most notorious predators of our time and still reach the top.
Would the Honourable Member give way?
Yes.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. I wonder if she agrees with me that potentially every single working person, retired person and child in this country has paid the price for some of these comments. Because if Mandelson did indeed share information relating to the financial crash, it has cost everybody a fortune, and he owes every member of this country an apology.
I absolutely agree. This is a systemic issue, and that's why I support the calls for an independent, judge-led public inquiry. Madam Deputy Speaker, yes, Peter Mandelson was eventually removed as US Ambassador, but he remained in the House of Lords and as a Labour Party member until 3 days ago. So the Labour Party cannot pretend that this was some distant mistake quietly corrected a long time ago. This was a decision they defended until they were forced to abandon it, and he should never have been appointed in the first place. If this Labour government believes that the appointment was proper, then it should stop stonewalling and prove it. Publish all the documents, the vetting, the advice, the risk assessments, the correspondence, and the contracts, including Palantir. Instead, the Prime Minister tabled an amendment to withhold any papers deemed prejudicial to national security or international relations. We know that when governments fear scrutiny, they wrap themselves up in the flag and hope that the public will look away. If there's nothing to hide, why carve out broad exemptions in advance? And the government's last-minute manuscript amendment is a desperate attempt to control dissent on the Labour backbenches. This is not accountability, it is not transparency, it's delay and it's damage control. They are kicking the can down the road in the hope that the outrage will fade and the questions will go away. Well, they won't. And that's why I'm supporting calls for an independent, judge-led public inquiry. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is not just about Peter Mandelson. It is about a system that protects the powerful and disregards the public. The victims deserved better, the British public deserve better. So the government must publish all the documents and the corruption and the cover-up and stop insulting the public with empty words when what we need is transparency. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister said he had full confidence in Peter Mandelson. While the public has no confidence in him, he should do the honourable thing and resign.
Madam Deputy Speaker, there is an old proverb, it may indeed be of Russian extraction, which maybe would be fitting enough, and it says this: tell me who your friend is, and I will tell you who you are. Yeah. And doesn't that sum up Peter Mandelson? Yeah. The friend of the child abuser, the friend of Jeffrey Epstein. He is the living personification of that proverb. He is a man apparently so corrupted in his own morals that he thinks what he did was okay, and perhaps corrupted financially. And that corruption, of course, is the product of his intoxication as a freeloader on the rich and the powerful. Yeah. And he has brought us to a very sorry pass indeed. But the abiding two words that will live from today relate to the Prime Minister, and they are, he knew. Yeah. Yeah. That is what will long outlive this debate. Yeah. He knew when he appointed him that he had this ongoing relationship with Epstein. He told us today, but he didn't know the depth of the relationship. Sorry, it's not about depth. It's not a question of scale. It's a question of, was there a relationship? Yeah. And the very fact there was should have been enough for any Prime Minister. Yeah. And that calls fundamentally into question the judgment of our Prime Minister. None. Our Prime Minister, and he is our Prime Minister, is a man who has to, on the world stage, make fine judgments. Day and daily, he has to make judgments that affect us all. And if on a matter so glaring as this, his judgment is patently and fatally flawed, then it does raise fundamental question of how we can trust the Prime Minister's judgment. Even those who knew Peter Mandelson tangentially would have had enough suspicions to question his appointment. We in Northern Ireland know something of him. He was our Secretary of State at the turn of the century for 2 years, until he had to resign over the passport application scandal. I then next encountered him when I was a member of the European Parliament, when he was the United Kingdom's Commissioner in the EU Commission, appointed then as the Trade Commissioner from 2004 to 2008. And that was not uncontroversial. 2006, I well remember, in the European Parliament, controversy about the fact that he had been holidaying on a yacht with an Italian tycoon whose business had benefited from his imposition of EU anti-dumping tariffs on Chinese shoes. And the Italian manufacturer of shoes was a beneficiary of those anti-dumping tariffs. And there he was, months later, on his yacht. Wow. 2 years later, he was on another yacht. Must be something about yachts. In Corfu, with a Russian oligarch. Mr. Mandelson, as Trade Commissioner, had just cut the EU import tariffs on aluminium, benefiting the oligarch company, Rusal, who were in the business, in the aluminium business. Yes, I'll do that.
Very grateful, gentleman, for giving way. Would you agree with me that there may be some considerable merit in both the Commission and the Parliament, just looking over their paperwork, to see precisely where these things link and whether he breached rules when he was serving as a Commissioner?
That's the point I was coming to. Sadly, maybe the European Union being the European Union, there was no great interest in investigating those matters. They were rather swept under the carpet. But I do say this to the government. He was there as the United Kingdom's Commissioner on the Commission. And I think that gives status and opportunity to venture into inquiries about those matters. And then, of course, he came back to be sacked again. Now, all of that is largely in the public domain. Before we come next or near Epstein, and yet equally in the public domain at the point of appointment was the knowledge that he had this ongoing relationship with a man who, upon his release from prison for his child abuse, Mandelson described it as his liberation. And our Prime Minister decided he was a suitable person to be our ambassador in probably the most important capital in the world, in Washington. That was a fatal flaw of judgment by the Prime Minister. And it will, I fear, hallmark much of his premiership. That a man who made a decision such as that, and then came to this House in September, when these things began to leak out, and expressed his confidence in Mandelson. So not just had we the flawed judgment in appointing him, we then had the continuing upholding of him by the expression of confidence, until finally the Prime Minister ran out of road on this issue. But he has left hanging around his neck that fatal flaw and misstep, and it's more than that, in appointing him. It was a fatal mistake, a flaw of judgment, and it does raise a fundamental point as to the ongoing credibility of this Prime Minister. And that is the abiding legacy of this situation.
Dr. Luke Evans.
Beware of Greeks bearing gifts. It's a slightly obscure quote, and it comes from a Trojan priest. And he was the one who spotted the warning, because many of you know the wider story of the Trojan horse. He said, beware of Greeks bearing gifts. Because actually, the moral of the story in terms of the Trojan horse was the fact that warnings were there and they were ignored. That's fundamental to what we're seeing here today, because Troy didn't fall because there was no warnings. It was because they were dismissed, sent away, ignored. The advice was ignored, and it led to catastrophe. Now let's apply that to our Prime Minister today. He appointed an ambassador known literally for decades as the Dark Knight for operating behind the scenes. That was his reputation. Not only on that basis, he was sacked not once, but twice from his cabinet roles. So every instinct in me says no other member of Parliament, both on this side or the other, would think they are a suitable candidate to be ambassador of this great nation to one of our greatest allies. And we've heard we can't have more information because of national security.
Rubbish.
But this side of the House, we're not asking to see the blueprints of the horse or the set out of the blueprints of the walls of Troy. No. We're simply asking, was he warned before he wheeled through the Trojan horse that is Mandelson, into government? Did he receive any information? Did he know anything? And I was thinking about this point this morning until we heard the Prime Minister speak today at Prime Minister's Questions. As has rightly been pointed out only in the speech before me, he did know. This isn't analogue or digital. He knew there were concerns, and yet he went on and made an appointment. So this is not about the intelligence that we're looking at, but actually the judgment to understand whether advice was given and whether it was followed. It's not how that advice was written, it's simply whether or not it was inferred, passed on, and ignored. Now, what hasn't been mentioned in this debate is that we've been round this once before. We had a Standing Order 24 debate, for those of you who remember, only just before Christmas. And at that time, I raised the point, why did the Prime Minister not come to the House? He is the one, by his own admission, who makes the decisions. He, therefore, knows all the answers. And when he came into government and he stood at the doors of number 10, he said he wanted to do things differently. All he has proved is that he doesn't have the leadership to come and answer the very questions that need to be put to him. Yet again, we're spending parliamentary time debating about whether there will be information released, which he knows himself. He could have spent the next 5 hours that we're going to spend debating this, answering the questions and setting this right. But instead, he's not here. Now, you'll often answer, well, convention states that no other prime ministers did it. Well, actually, some of them did. But more importantly, this prime minister said he was going to be different. This prime minister told us he wanted to see change.
On that point,
I will take an interview.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. I found today shocking where the Prime Minister has openly admitted that he knew that Mandelson had an ongoing relationship with a convicted paedophile at the time he appointed him.
Yeah.
And anything else we discuss today, that goes against any value I stand for in my life, any value my constituents will stand for. Yeah. Does my honourable friend believe that it's untenable for the Prime Minister to stay in his position?
Yeah.
I think he's absolutely right, because as Troy fell because leaders ignored when the horse was at the gates, the advice given then, Prime Ministers fall for the same reason. And so he is either saying his judgment was so catastrophic that he didn't see what all of us have instinctively, or that he chose to ignore the information. And both of them, either outcome, are the problem facing us today.
Yeah.
Now, it's customary in these kind of debates for me to pose questions towards the ministerial team here. But actually, I'm not going to do that. My question is to the people behind them. Because why are we having a humble address? This is the very opportunity, the very literal reason we have humble addresses. They exist in moments like this for when there's stalling in scrutiny, when we can't get the answers that this House demands, when there's obfuscation and no way forward. We are asking today the monarch to compel the government to give that information out. And that's not important just for the party politics, but important for both sides of this House and the wider country. Now, the House and the motion doesn't ask the other side to condemn. It simply asks to clarify. We need to know who said what, when, why, who knew what, with whom, and what were the discussions. I think that's something that could be supported on all sides of the House.
Yeah.
Clarity is what a humble address strives for. Backbenchers are not being asked to defend or attack the appointment at all. They're simply being asked to step forward and vote for a motion that means all of us, here in this House and across the country, get to understand why the Prime Minister made his decision. Because if he won't come to the dispatch box and answer the questions to do so, maybe the very documentation that he's seen and signed off will show the answers. So I ask them on the other side of the House, do support this motion. do stand up for that simple transparency, and let's get some clarity on what has happened and what is going to happen going forward.
Sir Christopher Chair.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it's a pleasure to follow my honourable friend, who participates a lot more frequently than I do in these Opposition Day debates, and on the basis of the quality of the debate today, I should come along more often. I must say that the background to this, the immediate background to this, is the ghastly behaviour of Epstein and the sexual abuse and the child trafficking and all that goes with it. And I asked the question the other day as to whether that sexual trafficking might involve not just women and girls but also young men. And I think that is unresolved at the moment, but perhaps we'll find out more in due course. But I wish to focus in my remarks on a period going back to 1997, Madam Deputy Speaker, long before you were able to recall much about politics, I know. But that was when Mandelson was first appointed by Tony Blair as the Minister without portfolio in charge of the Millennium Dome. And the reason I recall all this is because there was a time when I was the Shadow Minister for the Millennium Dome. And also, for that matter, the Shadow Minister for the Millennium Bug. I recall well the way in which the Mandelson enjoyed the opportunity to promote a grandiose New Labour scheme of this dome, which was, I think, going to be the 4th largest open enclosed space in the world. It cost in the end, I think, £750 million. The number of visitors who attended the Dome in the year 2000, which was half of what it had been estimated it was going to be. And Mandelson was really proud of this because it had a link with his grandfather, who must be turning in his grave, Herbert Morrison, a really great public servant. And his grandson has betrayed the public service in an enormous way. But Herbert Morrison was involved in the Festival of Britain. And so Mandelson thought that by being responsible for the Millennium Dome and promoting it, he would be able to, in a sense, emulate the great efforts of his grandfather. And so the project proceeded. And it was costing an enormous amount more than had been forecast by the Treasury or had been expected. So what happened was he was in the business of looking for sponsorship for the Dome. And that was when he used agents, and I think particularly Keith Vaz, who used to be a member of this House but left in disgrace. He used Keith Vaz and the Hindujas as a means of being able to get some extra income for his Dome project. And so what happened was that the Hindujas were able to offer £1 million for a faith centre inside the Dome. But of course, this didn't happen just by chance. This was linked with the fact that back in 1990, the Hinduja brothers had applied for British citizenship and had it rejected. And in 1998, with the new Labour government, they saw an opportunity to rectify that and to get their citizenship back. So what did they do? They engaged Keith Vaz. Through him, there were relationships with Mandelson, and the £1 million towards the Dome was forthcoming. And in return, there was an acceleration of the passport application by Srihat Hinduja. He applied, I think, in the middle of '98, and his application was granted in January of 1999. Yeah. And that happened, and his brother's passport arrived not long after that. And there was an enormous amount of suspicion around all this. And I can remember, as the shadow minister for the Dome, trying to get us... I got a good story, actually, on the front page of the Sunday Times, linking Hinduja with Mandelson and the money for the Dome. And as soon as I got that, and I went off to thinking I'd be able to do the usual rounds, the whole story was closed down by Alistair Campbell and Mandelson, saying this was a whole load of rot. There was no truth in it whatsoever. We know that at the time there was a denial by Mandelson that he had any dealings with the Home Office on behalf of the Hindujas. Subsequently, there seemed to become evidence that there had been dealings, and what happened, and I think this is a message that we should bear in mind, and that is what happened was that an inquiry was set up into whether or not there had been dealings between the Secretary of State and with the Hindujas. And Sir Anthony, what was his name? Sir Anthony Hammond, a distinguished retired civil servant. I think he'd been in charge of the Home Office and as Treasury Solicitor. He was asked to produce a report, which he did in 2001. That report totally exculpated any involvement of either Mr. Vaz or of Mandelson in any wrongdoing. And then subsequent to that, a few weeks after that report had been published, which was a complete exoneration, then more papers were discovered, amazingly. And so what happened was that the inquiry by Sir Anthony Hammond was reopened, in itself quite an unusual event. And the inquiry was reopened, and what happened, the consequence was, he discovered, having looked at these extra papers that had been hidden away, he discovered that there had in fact been dealings between Mandelson and actually with Michael O'Brien, who was a very distinguished and honourable Labour member who served at that time in the Home Office. And so Mandelson had consistently lied, he covered up, he behaved in a way which is totally unacceptable. And that was all that time ago in 2002. That was when the revised report of Sir Anthony Hammond was produced. Yeah, of course.
I'm grateful to the member for allowing an intervention. He's giving a historical perspective, which we all appreciate, I'm sure. It seems that Mr. Mandelson is a serial liar. And this morning, would he agree that the Prime Minister had said that Mr. Mandelson lied to him and lied to him and lied to him? Who in this House has never been lied to?
I don't know how. I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for his intervention. I don't know in his professional life. I don't know how much credibility he's given to people who he knows to be serial liars, and that is the issue. If one's on an interview panel, in a sense, that's what the Prime Minister was doing. He was interviewing his close friend for a job. And the essence of that was he must have known he was talking to somebody who was a serial liar. Of course I could wait.
The other important point is there is one thing we know he didn't lie about, because the Prime Minister knew it and said he knew it today, was that he had continued his contact with Jeffrey Epstein after he'd been convicted as a paedophile. There was no lies in that, and the Prime Minister admitted he knew it. So defend that.
Shocking.
My honourable friend makes a sort of typical point that's made in court when you've got the defendant is found out to be lying, and so you address the jury and say he's lied about that, members of the jury. How can you trust him to be telling the truth about the charge which he's facing in the court? In public office, serial liars should not be tolerated. Yeah. I give way.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way.
perhaps I could rephrase the question he's had from the benches opposite.
Go on.
How was the Prime Minister to know that the famous serial liar, Peter Mandelson, was going to lie to him?
If the Prime Minister was here, he'd be able to answer that question, I'm sure.
I suspect he's told you as
well. So that's where what has always amazed me, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm sure a lot of others, is how is it that Mandelson has continued to rise again from the ashes after each disgrace? And I will, yes, okay.
I'm grateful to him giving way. And could he potentially tell us what we can learn about some of the documentation and the way the investigation ran back then? Because as he pointed out in his speech, there were papers and he was exonerated, yet there were papers found and then suddenly he was guilty. Would it be helpful to understand what needs to be done today's debate to make sure that we have the information right as we need to be able to make the inferred decisions and understanding behind what's going on?
I'm grateful for that. I was going to conclude by saying I go along with those people who have been calling for a public inquiry, because a public inquiry would be able to require the production of the documents. And we know from this Sir Anthony Hammond's experience that a non-judicially led public inquiry can't necessarily get access to all the documents that are needed. And I don't think we want to have some whitewash inquiry by the Cabinet Office and then a couple of years later find out that they didn't have all the documents in front of them. So I think that's the argument in favour of having a public inquiry. But the other point I really wanted to make was that how is it that this Teflon-coated Mandelson has continued to be able to hold high office in the Labour Party for all those years? And that's why I think that one of the most important speeches in the Chamber today was a speech from the Honourable Member for Leeds East. Because he and the Honourable Member for Islington, Right Honourable Member for Islington North, know what it's like to be on the receiving end of the Stasi, in this case, the New Labour Stasi. And I think that the only explanation I can find for the fact that Mandelson continued to be reinstated after all this bad behaviour is that he was seen as a key member of the New Labour Stasi, an enforcer, and somebody who was very plausible, well-connected, and knew how to ingratiate himself with the rich and powerful. I give way to my right honourable friend.
Not only was he a key member of New Labour, he was the inventor of New Labour. He was the man who came up with replacing whatever the implements were of horny-handed toil on the Labour flag with the red rose. He was the brander par excellence. And I think also people were afraid of him. I'm not the first person to describe this as the Scandalson story, and I'm sure I won't be the last.
Yes, hear.
Well, I'm sorry I understated the proposition, and my right honourable friend is quite right to correct me on that. And I think that if we had a public inquiry, we'd be able to extend the terms of reference of that public inquiry into Mandelson's influence over the internal politics of the Labour Party over those last 30 years. Wouldn't that be interesting? I could wait my
honourable friend is making a great speech about the influence of Mandelson within the Labour Party. It's currently being reported that he has been involved in the selection of many of the new candidates, up to 25%. Do you think that those documents should be made available of anybody that he's helped recruit into the Labour Party?
They're not here to defend them. I am having difficulty hearing the debate. Sir Christopher Sharp.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think what you were hearing was the incredulity being expressed by my honourable friends at this revelation that this man who was so discredited already has had such an influence in the choice of candidates, many of whom have been successfully elected at the last general election. I don't know how they're going to be voting in this debate this evening, but it's extraordinary that Mandelson has had this enduring influence and over politics in this country for such a long time, and it's taken essentially the production of documents in the United States to enable us to be able to get somewhere near the truth.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. The government tried to stop full disclosure of documents today, and members opposite, I think primarily, identified that, said they wouldn't put up with it, and it's thanks to them there's a manuscript amendment. But there may still be a misunderstanding, because the member for Welwyn Hatfield said that the ISC would be vetting the documents before they were released. That's not my understanding. The truth is they may get to see them, however inappropriate it is that they're not published to the whole House. And does my honourable friend agree with me? Ministers need to set out today that that can be not only referred to the ISC, but the ISC, if it agrees that that document should be made public and it doesn't see it as injurious to our security, then they should be released.
Absolutely. And we've got to erode this cancer which is affecting our public life and the esteem in which public servants are held. And when the public see what has happened over this period of time, in the Mandelson case, they must be horrified. And of course I could wait, yes.
Way. I'm a member of the 2024 entry, and I'm very grateful I've never had to meet the cretin that is Peter Mandelson. But can I just be clear? Party politics aside, or not, actually. I didn't join the Labour Party because I hold anyone in high esteem who has led the party, influenced the party. I joined the Labour Party for two very important reasons. One, the welfare state is one of the most important things this country's ever done, and the National Health Service. Now, I think it's dangerous when we hold someone in such high esteem and we give so much power to so few people that things like this are allowed to happen. But let me be also very clear. My faith in the Labour Party to continue to deliver for people of this country continues. My faith in people like Peter Mandelson, I am very, very grateful that he is no longer a member of this party.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for her intervention, and I'm certainly not going to make any accusations about her owing any patronage to Peter Mandelson. And it seems from what she says that she's going to join those of us in this House who are independently minded and express our views in a straightforward manner. But let us be clear, it's obvious that a lot of people on her side who were elected at the same 2024 general election, they were chosen by panels which included Mandelson. And this is not just an exclusive problem for the Labour Party, but we must recognise in our democracy that the people who choose the candidates have enormous power. And if those people who are choosing the candidates are corrupt, as in the case of Mandelson has now been established, then that puts grave doubt upon the credibility of our democratic institutions. Of course I will.
Friend for giving way, but actually, according to reports, it's worse than that where Peter Mandelson had his fingertips through the whole of the Labour Party, but also the government, because there are reports that he was actually, after the Prime Minister had realised that he still had a continuing relationship with Epstein, was in number 10 during the cabinet reshuffle of the 5th of September. So actually, he hasn't had a direct role in appointing half the cabinet, hasn't he?
Well, these revelations keep coming, and the answers come there none, and I hope that in due course we'll be able to pursue these points further with the Prime Minister when he next appears in the House. I give way to my honourable friend.
What we're talking about really here with this appointment of Mandelson really is the judgment of the Prime Minister. And when we look at the judgment of him appointing Mandelson, that he's now a key part in the Starmer government, in appointments, what goes on, the key people, it begs into question every judgment of this Prime Minister, from Chagos to China to the Northern Ireland Troubles Act. This today, I would say, is the crumbling of Starmer. His judgment is poor. His judgment is ruining this country and the Labour Party.
My right honourable friend is absolutely right. It's fundamental judgment and discretion and the way we behave, and that's part of our character. And we know that the character is set quite early in life, and certainly we can see from the case of Mandelson that it hasn't changed in all the time that he was being involved in public life and public service, so-called. And so the point I'm just going to make, and I'm going to finish in a minute, but what has... It's only because of what has been revealed in the United States that we are now in a position to know that he's no longer Lord Mandelson, no longer the Right Honourable Lord Mandelson. Yes, I'll give way here.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. In order that the Minister can have time to prepare and perhaps find out if he doesn't already know, does my honourable friend agree that he should find out, was Mandelson in number 10 Downing Street at the time of the last government reshuffle? Was he involved? Were his fingers involved in the appointment of ministers on that Treasury bench? And if he's able to tell us later categorically that he wasn't, that will be a relief to this House.
And if we can't get a straight answer from the government to that my honourable friend's question, then that's another reason why I would say that we need to have a public inquiry. I give way to my honourable friend.
You mentioned the revelation coming out of emails. The point I made earlier, which I think is also very important for the Minister to answer, is actually the government could have asked the Department of Justice in the States, is there anything in the emails that haven't been released that relates to Mandelson that could affect our decision to appoint him? There was nothing stopping them approaching the DOJ and asking that. It's vital that we know whether they did or not.
That's another very good point that's been made, and I'm sure it will be picked up on the Treasury bench and they will respond accordingly. But we have to thank our mercies in a sense that Mandelson has been exposed finally, and it wasn't just that exposure outside George Osborne's house. Yes, of course I would. Yeah.
Thank you very much for giving way. I very much enjoyed the history lesson about a man who has a history of misfeasance in public office. And I've spoken in this House about my surprise at his appointment as the US ambassador, which is an incredibly important relationship for this country. Listening to the debate, it makes me reflect on the importance of parts of our Constitution which give us freedom of speech and freedom of the press. Two incredibly important things, and I think we all owe a great vote of thanks and gratitude to Elon Musk and X, who has played his part in exposing a great deal of this evil.
My honourable friend makes his point in his own way. I would just draw attention to the fact that this is Freedom 250 is how the United States is describing the 250th anniversary of independence in their celebrations. And the points he makes about freedom really resonate well both sides of the Atlantic, and we must never forget that. And we could have been involved with having our representative in the United States during this historic year as being none other than Mandelson. So we must thank everybody who's been involved in trying to bring the revelations to light which have shamed the Prime Minister, because I think the Prime Minister in the end was shamed into sacking him rather than exercising his own judgment. I give way once more.
Does my honourable and very experienced friend believe that one of the lessons of inherent necessity for political survival is the ability to learn from mistakes? And therefore, given that a new ambassador will be taking Mandelson's place, I don't think a permanent appointment has yet been made. Does he think the Prime Minister will have enough good sense and wit to appoint a diplomatic professional to the role, or will it be another ill-starred flunky that he favours for political and personal reasons.
Probably.
Well, actually, I'm grateful for my right honourable friend's intervention, but actually I think the appointment has been made. I met the gentleman concerned, who is an esteemed member of the diplomatic corps, and he was present at Mr. Speaker's dinner in honour of the Speaker of the House of Representatives 2 or 3 weeks ago. So I think we are in safer, more secure hands there. But that's a good note on which to, I think, I'll go once more.
In relation to, during the debate we've heard that there is a new manuscript amendment coming forward, at which it says, shall instead be referred to the Intelligence and Security Committee of Parliament. Does he share my concern, however? All that information that we've been requested for in this amendment is going to go there. We as yet have not heard from the government what would actually happen with that, where the reports would come, what would be done, and what the judgment is about whether or not an embarrassment for a Labour government is different to a security side of things, indifferent to an international relation. Does he share my concern without the government setting out what that framework may look like? It's quite hard to vote this through without losing the risk of having transparency.
Well, I'm not going to suggest we don't vote in support of our own motion, frankly. And I'm sure that we know from the course of this debate that a lot more questions are being raised, and in due course, I think with the forensic leadership shown by the Leader of the Opposition, we will be able to get to the bottom of these issues and get the answers which we deserve. But in the meantime, it's quite frustrating for people. And I'm just going to finish on a final note, and that is, I didn't go to Oxford, Madam Deputy Speaker, but I think we should show solidarity with the people of Oxford University, who had the wisdom not to elect Mandelson as the Chancellor of that university.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a great honour to follow my honourable friend from Christchurch, who I have to say was one of his shorter speeches that I'm. Look, we come here for a very serious matter of one of the most utmost gravity. I've heard a number of really good speeches from all sides of the House, including members of the opposite benches, and I do commend all the members who have stood up and said, because it's not an easy thing to do, all of the members who have stood up and said that they're not happy with the government's position. I am very, very pleased that we've got to a point where there is a manuscripted amendment now that will force the hand of the government and make sure that the ISC has a pivotal and critical role to play. But I do want to pick up on a number of members who made some points that I do agree with and some that I don't. And while I agreed with a lot of the points that were said today, I did notice that a couple of members did say the government got here because they demonstrated leadership. They did not demonstrate leadership. No. They got here because they were dragged here to do so. They got here because there was a dump of documents by the DOJ, and the Leader of the Opposition tabled a motion which forced their hand, which meant that members opposite had to finally confront the fact that the Lord Mandelson, Peter Mandelson, had a relationship with Epstein for much longer than many of us knew, but certainly the Prime Minister knew. As we found out earlier today. But this idea that the government has demonstrated leadership is for the birds. And it's important, by the way. It's important because I've heard members across the House talk about the victims of Epstein. But I say to members opposite, they are just words if you do not follow them up with action. And while the ISC amendment is important today, that is not the end of the journey. Because for months now, we have been pushing on this side of the House to get clarity and find out the truth as to what has been going on with the appointment of Lord Mandelson. This goes right to the heart of our politics. And what did we find out today when the Leader of the Opposition challenged the Prime Minister? He'd run out of road, and he finally had to come clean that he knew about his relationship. And this idea that you need to know the depths of the relationship. I asked the members opposite, what is the depth of a relationship with a paedophile that you need to have before it becomes eligible for declaration? I'll give way.
I think the fact that the Prime Minister resisted giving that answer for so long proves the fact he knows it's incredibly damaging to his judgment, that he didn't want people to know that he had known and appointed him anyway.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's. I agree with my honourable friend, and we were sat together in the debate reflecting on some of the speeches, and when we talk about, I think it was the Health Secretary who talked about the toxic culture at number 10. Well, this debate, that amendment was a demonstration of that toxic culture, because it wasn't for the victims of Jeffrey Epstein that amendment was put forward. It was to protect the Prime Minister. Now, of course, I get. Absolutely.
And does my honourable friend agree with me that actually to try and focus on the angle of what he did as a minister in releasing secrets and trying to get them to make money from them, etc., is still deflecting from the fact that a man who was associating with a convicted and now released paedophile was felt to be worth the risk to have been sent to America as the ambassador?
Exactly. We should all share anger in that, because it speaks to a rot that has now, as we find out, has infected our politics and government in this country, Labour governments in this country, for decades. And look, I get it. People make mistakes, but this is what the people. I get it. People make mistakes on all sides of the house, but this is of such gravity that it speaks to a corruption that we absolutely need to get to the answer of. But the point my honourable friend just made, my right honourable friend just made, the point he just made is really, really important, because that is one issue about corruption, but you cannot get away from the fact that Mandelson had a role at every echelon of the Labour Party's journey, whether it was New Labour before we came into power in 2010, or the new Labour that is now in charge. Whether it was helping in the selection of candidates, or it was whether it is the honourable members shake their head, and I'm more than happy. I'll take the intervention on behalf of everybody.
I thank the honourable member for taking the intervention, and I intervene to make a point, because I wouldn't want any member of this House to inadvertently besmirch any other member through misleading information. I served on the National Executive Committee of the Labour Party for 10 years before I entered this place. Peter Mandelson had no role whatsoever in the selection of Labour Party candidates during that time. So I would just make that point so that individuals are aware exactly of what they're talking about.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm pleased to say I didn't mention any single member of the House, so I'm happy that she's put that on record. But I do not trust Mandelson. And I do not trust. I'm answering the intervention. I do not trust Mandelson for what he has done, and how far his reach was in this government or in this party. I do not trust him because we know he had a very close relationship. She can shake her head all she wants. We know she had a close relationship with Morgan McSweeney, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff. The party opposite hasn't even started to address the point of the Chief of Staff. And I do not believe for a second, and I hope she's right, by the way, but just in case she's not, and the documents do come to the fore, I'm sure we'll come back to this House to scrutinise which members he had a hand in appointing.
Thank you. Just on that point, it's currently in the mainstream media at the moment that Mandelson had a handle on recruiting candidates for the Labour Party. The mainstream media are reporting this. They will have evidence to support this and back this up. There will be candidates that have been selected where he's had his hand on, and he's also been in cabinet reshuffles. That's what is rumoured to believe. So he has had a far bigger reach than probably most of you realise, and any defence of that now is indefensible.
I couldn't have said that better myself, although I may not have used the word you, but that's This is important. This is important because of the reach that Mandelson had and how he was enabled. And at every step of the way, there was no regard for Jeffrey Epstein's victims. And that is a really, really important point, because there's been a lot of obfuscation today. We've had to drag the government into this position where this amendment has now been put forward, where they now will release documents to the IC. And I noticed the earlier intervention about the role of the IC that my honourable friend made. I think it was a really important point. Because if members opposite, I say this again, this is not the end of the journey. They have a role to play now. They have a role. I will admit they have a role to play now in terms of doing right by those victims. Because what we do know is that Mandelson was an enabler. And anyone who's enabled Mandelson needs to take a long, hard look at themselves.
Giving way. But isn't the wider point here, if the Prime Minister was duped, wouldn't you be releasing the papers back in September when we had the SO24 debate, or putting them out now, rather than bringing it to a debate here where he's forced his hand to to have these papers? The only reason we're having some papers released is because his hand has been forced by the Leader of the Opposition. Doesn't he think that's bizarre?
Correct. Well, it's not bizarre because we've been here many times before. They've been dragged time after time, scandal after scandal. I say to backbenchers opposite, this is a Prime Minister who's now flailing. He's admitted, after months and months of pushing, that he knew about the relationship that Mandelson had with Epstein, and yet he thought it was a risk worth taking anyway. And I made this point earlier, that risk worth taking, it wasn't just about denigrating the experience of those victims. It's also, the risk worth taking was marching all those members up a hill and using their careers. And it's okay, look, we're members of Parliament, we care about our careers, you know, wherever they may end up. But the truth of the matter is he did not care about that. And that journey is not over yet, because he is going to use them over and over again. He will throw people under the bus. Before he throws his chief of staff under the bus, that will happen too. I can almost guarantee it.
Does my honourable friend think that we're going to get to any sort of position where we can start to understand what level of influence did Mandelson have that, having not declared six-figure sum loans, had to resign from government, having tried to flog passports, had to resign from government, having gone off to the EU and now all the allegations of that brought back into government, put in the House of Lords, there must have been something that made people think it was a good idea to bring him back again and again and again.
The exasperation that my right honourable friend shows is exactly the exasperation that the British public will be seeing as they read the headlines, and they have been seeing and showing as the stories have unfolded. As the stories, I will in a minute. As the stories have unfolded over the last few days and over the last few months, and this really comes to a really fundamental point about the toxicity at number 10. And this is really important because this is where the members, you know, they have the authority and the power to do something about this. The toxicity at number 10. Because the rot starts at the top. And this is fundamental. Because the Prime Minister, it was obvious to all of us, it was obvious to all of us about this relationship that Mandelson had. It was obvious to us when he appointed Mandelson to one of the most important positions in our country and one of the most important capitals in the world. One of the most important capitals in the world. It was obvious to us. And the Prime Minister did it anyway, because he thought it was a risk worth taking.
In response to the intervention from my right honourable friend, the member for Wetherby, there's a key difference between this Prime Minister and former Labour Prime Ministers in that Gordon Brown and Tony Blair appointed Peter Mandelson without knowing some of the connections that he had. The key difference is that this Prime Minister knew and still did it. So there is still a Labour Prime Minister with integrity, and that's Gordon Brown, who actually took this to the police. This Prime Minister did no such thing.
I thank my honourable friend, who always makes excellent points, and I was going to talk about Gordon Brown later, but I will do it now. Because he raised the question back in September. He wanted to know what has gone on, and he asked the question, and he was battered away. Has any government minister, when the minister stands up at the dispatch box, has he asked the Cabinet Secretary why the former Prime Minister was battered away? Did that former Prime Minister not have any respect in number 10 for him to get a legitimate answer as to what happened and what went down there? I think the public deserves to know. I think this House deserves to know. I think there's another point I just wanted to make around integrity, and it was made by a number of members earlier, including my right honourable friend for Skipton and Ripon. The Prime Minister, by that admission, has called into question the integrity of every member of this House, because we all know that trust in politicians is at an all-time low. We all know that. We see it on our doorstep. We see it in our inboxes. I was at a birthday party for my four-and-a-half-year-old son on the weekend. I was chatting to some parents, and of course, with the Mandelson headlines, this came up. And I had to say, look, it's not normal for a billionaire to fly people out, fly members. You know, we have a pretty strict expenses regime. You know, despite what after the expenses scandal, we have to, you know, we can't move left or right, and yet the British public do not trust us because they think we take them for granted. And I had to explain to them that it's not normal to be invited onto islands and have all these luxuries thrown at you. This was not a normal kind of behaviour. And yet the Prime Minister knew about this relationship and he let it happen. And this is really important. Absolutely.
Thank my honourable friend for giving way. What I find more extraordinary is, as he says, the Prime Minister knew, but he also stood at that dispatch box in September and said that he had full confidence in Peter Mandelson, Lord Mandelson, knowing what he knew. Does he not find that extraordinary?
I find it disgusting.
Yeah.
I find it disgusting. And I say to Labour members opposite, they are now at a crossroads. And it's really, really important, this. Because if they really care about those victims, and what Epstein did was absolutely disgusting in its own right. He trafficked, he was a child sex offender. In many ways, he was a coward in how he left this world. Because I wish he'd face the full force of the law. But we have to be honest about the people. I think the honourable member for Bolsover talked about enablers and the powerful men and the role that they played. And Labour members now are at a crossroads. Because if they really care about the victims of Epstein, they really need to ask how this was allowed to happen. And it's not, by the way, it's not just about Mandelson, and it's not just about Epstein. My good friend for Rutland and Melton, for Rutland and Stamford, sorry.
Near Melton.
Near Melton. Made the point earlier about Bill Gates. To be honest, I was watching the video of Melinda Gates just yesterday, and I was talking to my wife about how horrible it must have been to see those emails and see what he was up to. She mentioned Richard Branson. The reality is, there is clearly a culture of men who thought they were above the law. And while the DOJ is grappling with it over there, and I commend the debate here. We've talked about some very important things here today. We also have to be honest about the fact that it came onto our shores. And it's possible that there are still victims that we don't know about. It is possible that there are still criminal investigations that need to happen. And the assurance I need from the front bench today is that if that comes open, or comes to the fore, that the government will act quickly to make sure criminal investigations are started. The public require that to help us on that journey to rebuilding trust, and we shouldn't underestimate that.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and he's making a powerful, wide-ranging speech, and I'm sure more details will come out. But doesn't it already come down to this, that the Prime Minister appointed a man, Peter Mandelson, as US Ambassador, who he knew at the time he appointed him had had a long-standing friendship with a prolific international convicted paedophile, to the extent that Peter Mandelson had stayed in that paedophile's house while he was serving prison time. And that in itself is sickening and shocking. And not only should nobody be defending Peter Mandelson, which they're not, nobody should be defending the Prime Minister for his sickening conduct.
The Prime Minister has really brought his judgment into question. Now, for us, of course, we've been saying it for a couple of years. Opposition do that. But on this issue, the way he's marched everyone up a hill, ministers have gone to defend this issue time and time again. His position really is now untenable. And I guarantee members opposite, they can go home to their constituencies and go talk to constituents right now. They will have to answer questions as to why the Prime Minister allowed this to happen.
Grateful to my honourable friend giving way, and he may have heard the powerful speech by the member for Leeds East earlier in the day about factionalism in the party. The Prime Minister not only appointed Peter Mandelson, knowing, as he declared today, what he knew, to the post of ambassador, he previously brought him in as a strategic advisor, advocate, planner in the 2024 Labour election campaign. So all members opposite are tainted by that association with Mandelson, brought about by the leader of their party, now Prime Minister, who knew about it at the time. And this perhaps hasn't been picked up on as fully as it should have been in today's debate.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm going to leave members to reflect on that, because I think many have spoken up today. But I say once again, they are just words if there is no action. And the judgment of the Prime Minister is deeply, deeply flawed. He allowed this, he alone is responsible for the culture at Number 10. I ran a business. If there was something going wrong, buck stopped with me. He alone is responsible for the culture at number 10. It's not Morgan McSweeney. He enabled Morgan McSweeney. It should definitely needs to be held accountable for his relationship, and we need to see those emails. We need to see what the conversations were. That's why this is important. But the buck stops with the Prime Minister.
I'm going to raise a very sensitive issue here because my honourable friend raised a point about vulnerable women being abused, about powerful men taking advantage, about a friend who was appointed, known to be a friend of a convicted paedophile. And we also have a Labour government who ran away from investigating grooming gangs. Again, vulnerable women taken advantage by powerful men, and a Labour government that said it stands up for women, stands up for women's rights and vulnerable women. It has shown now it does not at any level, at the highest level, and at those who are white working class girls. Labour, I'm afraid, has got a lot of answers about protecting women.
I'm going to end with my response, with two responses to that intervention. Number one, she's obviously absolutely right. And I say to members opposite and who are shaking their heads, it brings into question every decision. Every decision that the government has made because of the lack of judgment that the Prime Minister has shown. And I say to my honourable friend, I stood at that dispatch box and I repeatedly called for a national grooming inquiry. Right? I am a British, Pakistani male, I'm Muslim. I have two sons. I want them to grow up without aspersions being cast on them.
Hear.
Where one day I hope to have a daughter. Sorry to my wife. I want her to grow up in a safe environment. Right. So we have to be honest about that. We have to be strong in those calls. But I say to the Minister now, as he answers those questions, very key. The question about the ISC, really, really important. We need to know, with the amendment there, that they will get full authority to be able to deal with what comes in front of them, and so we can make a judgment, and the public can make a judgment. Number two, Gordon Brown raised the question: why did his calls fall on deaf ears? Was he not given the respect to the former Prime Minister for that to be dealt with? Was Mandelson that strong that his toxicity meant that he was protected and he was enabled? And number three, and the point that I made repeatedly, the judgment of the Prime Minister surely has to be in question. We will now find out what else was known. The Minister has an opportunity to show anything else that you might want to share at the dispatch box.
Point of order, John McDonnell.
I'm sorry, Madam Deputy Speaker, to disturb the debate in this way. I've tried to follow as much as possible. I've been in and out of the chamber, other duties. There is a draft amendment that's been agreed. I take it across party agreement on that draft amendment. The people will be making their minds up on how to vote on the impact of that amendment, and therefore we need to have clarity. And I just want to ask whether or not, and the front bench could intervene now to clarify it for me. The amendment basically says that if I get it absolutely clear, that the material, we're all going to vote for the material to be released. There's consensus on that. The difference that we had was with regard to who releases, who interprets what's released, and the amendment that's been put forward, it basically says accept those items, those elements of information which are prejudicial to national security and international relations, which shall instead be referred to the Intelligence and Security Committee of Parliament. I agree with that, but I want just the clarity, is will the Intelligence and Security Committee make the decision about publication, or please listen, or will it simply advise the government and then it rests with the government on the final decision? It will be helpful to have that clarified before we vote.
Point of order, Sir Jeremy Wright.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. If it's of assistance, and I recognise that the honourable gentleman is asking to assist the House, the answer to his question is that when the material is referred to the Intelligence and Security Committee, the committee is independent, it will act independently, it will consider the material referred to it and then decide how to respond, what to refer to publicly and what not to refer to publicly. But I can assure him the committee will act independently in this matter as it does in all matters.
Madam Deputy Speaker, if I could follow that.
Well, just one moment. So we have several other points of order. I'm keen that we do not conduct the debate via points of order. So if the right honourable gentleman will allow, I'm going to take 2 further points of order. I will then respond to his point of order, and hopefully we then might have an answer. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The point of order I want to raise is, following the answer we just heard, if the Intelligence Security Committee comes across evidence of commercial misdemeanours as well as intelligence misdemeanours and international relations misdemeanours, what powers do they have to do anything about it? Where will they refer those concerns to, and where will those inquiries lead to? Because the issues of lobbying, potential corruption in the handing out of government contracts is a massive one, which I wouldn't want swept under the carpet on the basis that this committee is dealing with international relations and national security.
Point of order, Cameron Thomas.
Deputy Speaker, this debate has heard an intervention this evening by the member for Great Yarmouth, rather tactlessly, I believe, who celebrated Elon Musk in this debate. Now, notwithstanding the fact that, like Mandelson, Musk has a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein and, in fact, was found to have been practically begging for a visit to his island, the member for Great Yarmouth declined to include the fact that...
Order. That is not a point of order and is a point of debate. And I do not think that in points of order, specifically around the Intelligence and Security Committee, that's an appropriate moment to raise that. Comments by other members are not for the Chair to rule on during the course of a debate. A point of order, Cameron Thomas.
I'm very grateful, Madam Speaker. The member for Great Yarmouth declined to include in his intervention his interest. He is, in fact, paid and bought and paid for by Elon Musk, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for that point of order? I think he has very clearly brought into question the probity of the member for Great Yarmouth. He might want to withdraw that. It is, of course, a matter for the member for Great Yarmouth, should he have declared a point of order. He could now do that by putting any interest on the record. Point of order, John McDonnell.
I'm really grateful for the intervention that took place. I just want the assurance that government will have no veto exercised over the information that will be provided via the committee.
Can I thank the right honourable gentleman for that point of order? As he will know, the powers of the ISC is not a matter for the Chair. However, the Minister on the front bench will have heard his comments and will have every opportunity in winding up to respond to that specific point and provide the entire House with the clarity that I believe it is looking for on that point. Point of order, Simon Hoare.
Further to that point, to the point of order made by the honourable gentleman, which he didn't quite get to finish, the honourable member for Great Yarmouth has in his published register of interests significant monthly payments by X Corp, headquartered in California. That surely should have been a declared interest when making the intervention.
Can I thank the honourable member for that point of order? He will know that declarations of interest are not a matter for the Chair. However, he might be advised to refer that to the Standards Commissioner for their investigation. Point of order, Rupert Lowe.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have declared these payments in my declarations, and I apologise if I should have declared them to the House. They're public, they're not hidden, and they have no relevance to what I discussed earlier.
The honourable gentleman will have heard my earlier comment that it is not a matter for the Chair, it's a matter for the Standards Commissioner if he failed to declare the interest during the course of the debate. If there are no more points of point of order, Paul Holmes.
Forgive me, Madam Deputy Speaker, for detaining the House, but can I ask for your clarification on whether a member saying that somebody in this House has been bought and paid for is in order?
I did ask the member to withdraw it. He now has the opportunity to do so.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I do withdraw the remark that he was bought and paid for. I do regret the tone that I have used.
Can I thank the honourable member for putting that on the record? Now, if there are no more points of order, Wendy Morton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. At the start of this afternoon, I sat through Prime Minister's questions, and I didn't really have any intention of taking part in this Opposition Day debate. I quite often do take part in what we call Oppo Day debates, but there were other commitments and things in the drive. This is not a point of order. I was asked to speak, wasn't I?
You were.
Yes. The officials are looking rather. Yes, the officials are looking rather perplexed at me here. Yes. So at the start of today, I had no intention to speak in this debate, but I sat through Prime Minister's questions and I listened to the Leader of the Opposition asking the Prime Minister direct questions, and with each question that went by, it was quite simple to me that there were more questions that were simply being answered, and there was an attempt by the government to simply sweep this issue to the side and to deflect to other matters around the periphery. So, I want to first of all come to the humble address. Now, I've not been in this place as long as some of my vintage colleagues here, and I say that in a very kind way. But I have a few scars to bear from my time as Chief Whip. I never lost a vote, mind. But the reason that I raise that is that I, like others in this place, know the significance of a humble address. A humble address is not used on a normal Opposition Day debate. It's used not as a regular occurrence, and it's not used lightly. It is used to indicate this is a very serious matter that we have brought to this House today. Initially, there were to be 2 debates, but because of the demand from this side of the House to have this issue debated and discussed, through usual channels, it was agreed the debate would take all afternoon. And it's been on this side of the benches that the most amount of scrutiny has been happening. Yeah. But I pay tribute to those on the opposition benches who have come in and had the government benches, yes, thank you, I would say the decency to explain to their front bench how they feel about this important matter. Now, it was also highlighted earlier that about the issue of national security. Now, in opposition, the Prime Minister, when he was Shadow Brexit Secretary back in 2018, I remember those days well, he proposed 3 humble addresses, none of them excluded national security. So this suggestion that we got this wrong was just not the case at all. Now, I'm pleased that the government has actually listened, yet again, to its backbenchers, and it's brought forward a manuscript, it is a monumental manuscript amendment. But if it wasn't for the pushing from these benches and those, I don't think we would even be there now.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. Isn't it shocking not only that the Prime Minister appointed Peter Mandelson knowing his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, but even today the Prime Minister has sought to deflect, cover up and bring in an amendment so as not to answer questions he must now answer.
My honourable friend is just so right, and I'm going to come to that a little bit later, because this is the core of this debate, isn't it? It's the fact that we want answers. There are huge questions about the judgment of the Prime Minister, about his appointment of Mandelson. Both sides have talked a lot about the victims, and that is so right. But it's important that if we're standing up for the victims, And we're standing up for the people that put us here, because we should never forget that. We need to ask the questions and we deserve the answers. And we, on this side of the House, will continue to keep asking those questions, because that is what the public and the victims deserve. They deserve transparency. They deserve accountability. Now, earlier I spoke as part of an intervention about the vetting process, and I'm not an expert on this at all, but it does seem strange to me that Peter Mandelson didn't appear to be, I would say, arguably fully vetted. He just went through strange sort of vetting or piece of paper checking process.
Yes. I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. Does she agree with me that the public are sick and tired of people who appear to fail upwards in public life simply for the reason that they appear to move in the right circles?
Yeah, correct. Absolutely. And I will share with this House today, I never set out to be a politician. I never in a million years expected to stand or sit on these green benches. But I did it to stand up for my local community because I felt that they needed a voice. I might not get everything right, none of us do. But one thing that I will do is strive to be a voice for those people that put me in this place. And let none of us ever forget that. So just back to vetting, what I would really like the Minister to explain to us is, did Peter Mandelson go through the exact same vetting process that a normal diplomat would if they were going to take up that post in Washington? The role of the UK ambassador to US is one of the most important roles within our Foreign Office. Yes.
Is not the answer to my honourable friend's question about vetting, can she foresee a circumstance where a professional diplomat would be given clearance if they had sold passports and taken undeclared loans?
Yeah, absolutely.
My right honourable friend makes a really important point there, because this is about probity and this is about evidence and making sure, for the reputation of this country, that we are appointing the right people. And yes, I declare I once was a member of that service, but I know that the people that serve our country as diplomats are of the highest integrity, and they have my trust. But when it comes to making political appointments, as today has shown, there are still questions that need to be asked. The other thing that is rather strange, Madam Deputy, is that everyone seemed to know that there were questions around Peter Mandelson. There were questions about the sort of person that he was. I think he was featured on Spitting Images once, wasn't it, as the Prince of Darkness? And yet, where was the Prime Minister? Where was his judgment? Was his head stuck in the sand? We on this side of the House, we are aware that the Prime Minister has been glowing about the talents of Peter Mandelson. Only in February, he said at the British Embassy in Washington, Peter is the right person to help us work with President Trump and take the special relationship from strength to strength. We are aware that Morgan McSweeney, Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff, pushed for Mandelson to become ambassador, sidelining long-serving, experienced diplomats. We are aware that Keir Starmer assured MPs that full due process was followed.
Honourable Lady, make sure that she refers to the Prime Minister as the Prime Minister, please.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I was getting a bit carried away there. The Prime Minister assured MPs that full due process was followed regarding his appointment of Peter Mandelson as ambassador. And we're aware that he appointed Peter Mandelson despite it already being in the public domain that Peter Mandelson had discussed issues relevant to his ministerial position